Welcome, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight. We really appreciate it. We have a special guest, Ann Dolin, with us here tonight. And on behalf of Felicia Allen and myself, again, very glad for all of you to show up. We have a good crowd here tonight. I've listened to Ann before speak a couple of times, and her information is valuable. I know that we're all here to help in any way our kids through the challenging um, role of education, trying to be there to support them in the best way that we can. And Anne's definitely going to help us out with that. So Anne was a former public school teacher. She knows how stressful it can be to support a child throughout their academic journey. We were just talking about her boys and how they both graduated from Flint Hill. So she's been through this. 30 years, she's helped families reduce that stress, first as a teacher, then as a founder of Educational Connections. What started as a 1 hour of tutoring at her kitchen table has grown into a team of more than 100 subject tutors, test prep tutors, and executive function coaches. They now work virtually one-on-one to help students overcome academic obstacles and reach goals. Anne is also the author of an award-winning Homework Made Simple: Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework, and her latest book, Getting Past Procrastination: How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy.
All right, Diane, thank you so much for that introduction. We'll get started. It's so great that all of you are here tonight, and so sorry for some of our technical glitches as we get going this evening. We're going to be talking about less policing and more parenting, how to improve your child's executive function skills without all the arguments. As Diane mentioned, I'm a former Fairfax County public school teacher, and now I own and operate Educational Connections. And every day, parents call our office looking for help for our kids. And they say things like, oh, just getting my child to sit down and focus is a battle. It feels like it's harder now than with before COVID. Sometimes parents are worried that their kids won't be able to keep up. Like right now, it seems like it's a struggle. What's it going to be like in the future? And then others, kind of like somebody who just said in the chat, I have to stay on top of them to do anything, to get anything done, is no fun. And no parent, as I mentioned, wants the role of homework police. We want to be a parent to our child, not really a taskmaster asking kids, did you do this? Did you do that? Let's get started. Come on, just finish already. We don't want those battles. Well, it's easy to think that when kids struggle in these areas, that it's just related to maybe not liking school, or perhaps the student could be a little bit lazy, or maybe they don't care so much. But often when we see these things over time, not just situational, like a couple of weeks or because of COVID, but when we've seen that kids struggle to do two things, to focus and finish, often it's rooted in something else. And quite often it's actually an executive function issue. Executive functions are actually cognitive processes in the frontal lobe of the brain, and they're really, really important for school success. And here's why. There's actually 8 of them. And as you can see, all of these things are super important, not just for doing well in life, but especially in school. So what I thought I would do tonight is just quickly touch base on each one, and then really hone in on the 3 of them that are super important for school. So let's start with inhibition. That is actually a person's ability to bat away distractions and focus on their homework. So if a student, even if they just have a little bit of homework, but maybe their brother is playing on the other side of the room, can they ignore the brother and focus on their work and get it done? That's an executive function of inhibition. Initiation, getting started. Not getting started necessarily on what you love, but getting started on something that's hard for you. Planning and organization. I personally think this is the most important skill, and the one that can confound kids, but it's the one that's really important, especially for middle and high school and even college. It's planning and organization. knowing I need to do these 2 things, or maybe it's these 3 things. This is the order that I'm going to do, prioritizing, and this is how I'm going to get it done. Kind of like having a plan of action. Self-monitoring means knowing if things aren't going so well for you, or if they are, and if they're not, shifting gears. Maybe it's, I see this a lot in older kids. I've been watching too much YouTube. I need to get back to my work. Working memory is actually not short-term or long-term memory, but it's your ability to juggle multiple things in your head at the same time. So if you say to your daughter, hey, Susie, go up to your room, get your hat, your gloves, and don't forget to brush your teeth, she has to juggle those 3 things in her head and remember all three things, which is really hard. Kids with weak executive function skills might come downstairs with their gloves, but not their hat, and they probably haven't brushed their teeth. Shifting means stopping one thing and starting another. Materials organization, it has to do with organizing your physical space. So it used to be that these were things like backpack, binders, folders, but now they have to do more with digital files. And then lastly, can you do these things and keep yourself under control? Can you focus and finish without having a meltdown, without being reduced to tears, or without fighting with your parents over little things? That's emotional control, and that's also an executive function. So as you hear some of these things, you might be thinking, what's the difference between somebody with good executive function? We all know those people. These are the people that they always have a plan of action. They're always on time. They like order in their lives. That's somebody with good executive function. And poor executive functions means they may struggle with their physical space. They may have a hard time being on time. They have a hard time prioritizing, and in school, getting work done and turning it in on time. And then on the other spectrum of it, ADHD. And so because parents often have that question, let me explain. And also, what's the difference between ADD? So attention deficit disorder is the same now as ADHD. ADD was changed to ADHD in the 80s. So that is the correct term now. So that means attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So if a person has the inattentive type, where they have a hard time paying attention, it's still the same diagnosis as somebody who has the hyperactive type, where there seems like a motor going around in them. Some people kind of have combined type, but ADHD now is the correct term. We don't use ADD anymore, but it is different than executive function issues. So somebody with ADHD with that diagnosis always has weak executive function skills, but not everybody with weak executive function skills meets the clinical diagnosis of ADHD. So if you see these things in your child, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have ADHD. You would have to talk to your pediatrician and get them tested. But to me, it often doesn't matter. If your student struggles with structure and following through and working independently, we still want to help that child, and we still want to put structures in place at home to support them. And here's the reason. If kids get a bad grade or exhibit a negative behavior, somebody said they have to always stay on top of their child to get things done. Basically, they're going to get criticized from others, from the parent, from the teacher, maybe from their sports coach. And when kids get criticized a lot, that results in lowered confidence. And when they have lowered confidence, they put forth even less effort. Their effort is reduced. And when you put forth reduced effort, which means you don't work as hard, then you see that negative behavior or poor grade again, and the cycle repeats itself. So we don't want that to happen to kids. We do not want this cycle of negativity. So what can we do as parents to help? Tonight, I want to share with you some strategies to boost executive functions to help kids with the skills that I mentioned earlier, to be able to think ahead, which is super important, especially as kids get older, and to stay organized. So let's start out with how we begin our week. This starts with a Sunday session. So a Sunday session for you and for your kids is basically a quick meeting. It might be after dinner on Sunday evening where you take time to preview the week and you say to your kids, let's talk about the week ahead. And you look at your schedule. And for kids in elementary school that don't have tons of homework and maybe a lot going on, but they have extracurriculars, what I would recommend is a weekly planner that you put in a public place. And a public place is like your refrigerator, a place where everybody can see. That's better than the child's room or maybe a desk calendar, for example. So once a week, you take your kids and you say, all right, let's talk about what we have going on after school this week. And on this calendar, either you can write it depending on the age of your kids, or they can write it. So they need to know, okay, on Wednesday and Friday, I go to soccer practice at 4:00. They should be able to write that on the calendar. If you have a couple kids, they can use different color markers. But the idea is you're planning ahead. And for kids with weak executive function skills, they don't naturally do this. So this is kind of like their week at a glance. And then each morning you can say, oh, let's look at what you have going on after school. Again, churning those executive function skills to get them to look ahead. If you have older kids, and by older, I mean like a fourth, fifth, sixth grader that may have more homework than just a worksheet once a week, and they tend to have long-term assignments, they may also want to put those assignments on this calendar. And these would not be things that are due the next day, but these would be big things that take time to do. So for example, a book report, a science project, those big things can go on the weekly planner too. Or if your child has an assignment notebook, they can go in the assignment notebook and you might say, hey, Jimmy, can you take out your assignment notebook, your agenda book? Do you have anything big coming up this week? If you have an older student, and I asked about people that have older kids, like middle schoolers, I would encourage them to get on Schoology if this is where their assignments are housed, and to look, what do you have coming up this week? Is there anything small you can do tonight to prepare for the week? So we always want to be working with our kids on thinking ahead. Otherwise, as they get older, they just show up for school on Monday morning without a plan. And without thinking, oh, I have that book report due on Thursday. I need to be doing a little bit something on Tuesday and Wednesday, so I'm not cramming at the last minute. We can develop those skills in our kids in elementary school that make big projects and block scheduling that they have when they're older a bit easier. Here's another thing that can help kids plan ahead, and this is called a launching pad. The idea of a launching pad is that at night, you plan ahead for the next morning. So you say to your kids, all right, let's get everything in the launching pad. That means your folders are in your binder, and your binder is in your backpack, and your backpack is in your launching pad. And so are all the other things that need to go to school. If you go to soccer practice right after school, all your soccer things go into your launching pad. Perhaps it's your musical instrument. Maybe you have a recorder or you have a flute that you need for school the next day. That goes into your launching pad. The idea is in the morning, there's no more scrambling around trying to find things that you need, but instead you launch into the day in an organized fashion. You might find, though, that kids also need other reminders. And what I will share is that a visual reminder trumps a verbal reminder. We want to get out of the habit of giving kids tons of verbal reminders. Don't forget, you have this after school. Make sure you bring these 3 things. Did you start yet? You know, all these verbal reminders can really wear on kids and they end up not listening to us. Instead, if there are certain things you want your kids to remember on a regular basis, put it in writing. Here's an example of what somebody might need for soccer. ball, shin guards, a water bottle. Make sure it's super succinct. Can't be like 10 things. That's too much for kids. Like 3 things, maybe 4 things. And I would put this by the door in which they exit. Same with the launching pad, that goes by the door in which they exit, but so can a checklist. And if you find, however, that a checklist doesn't work after a period of time, it actually might blend into the wall on which it's on. So you might have to sparkleize it. And by sparkleizing, I mean, you might have to put it on a pink piece of paper or move it to a different location or put some stickers or stars on it to make it stand out again. So instead of, hey, bring all these things and a verbal reminder, reference the checklist for your child to look at. Also, we can help our kids' executive function skills by asking powerful questions instead of telling kids what to do. Always telling kids what to do kind of creates a lot of friction in our relationship with our kids. Clearly, when kids are in kindergarten or first grade or even second grade, we're going to have more of a role in telling them what to do. But as they get older, we want to give them a little bit more independence. So instead of saying, hey, did you study for your math test? You might ask, what's the first thing you might do to get ready for your math test? Asking them how they might do it and helping them to think about it in an easier way instead of go study, which honestly, kids don't know how to study. It's kind of big and overwhelming unless they've been taught this skill, which is important. You might say what's something easy you might do to get ready. Perhaps they have a study guide, or maybe the teacher gave them some practice problems. Instead of, you better start that science project, help them to boil it down and ask, what's something small you could do to get started on that science project? In general, I try to avoid why questions with kids. I've found that they don't work well over time, especially as kids get older. So when we ask questions like, why didn't you turn that in? Why haven't you started that yet? Why didn't you get a better grade on your spelling test? These are hard questions for kids. They're difficult because they require a lot of critical thinking. And to be honest, asking why you didn't do better on your spelling test, the child might think, oh boy, well, let's see. I didn't know all those long vowel words and I should have practiced more. And I just started to blank out when I was taking the test. There's probably lots of reasons, and kids aren't going to tell you all of those reasons. So they're tough for kids. And sometimes when we ask a lot of why questions, it results in conflict or just like kids ignoring us altogether. So I try to ditch the why questions with kids. I actually have a ton of information on how to get rid of why questions and then replace them with ways to ask kids about going forward. And if you text the word communication to 55444, that will be sent to you and it will go straight to your inbox. So, and by the way, I want to save time to do a Q&A in about 10 minutes. So if you have a question, please throw it in the chat right now. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the gaps that have been left by COVID and what we can do about it. So helping kids that have weak executive function skills to shore up not only their executive function skills, but also some of the learning issues that they may have experienced in the last year and a half or almost 2 years. We found that with COVID, and this is across the country, so not specific to Colvin Run, but that kids in K-8 have lost about 4 months of math and about 3 months of reading. So what do we do as a parent? Because you might find yourself between a rock and a hard place, meaning that you're worried that your child is behind, but you're also not sure how to help them and they don't have a ton of homework. So you might be worried that they may not be getting the practice that they need to make up lost ground. So I want to share with you some ways that we can help kids, not just now during school, but these might give you a few ideas for how you can support your child this summer too. So I want to share with you 5 strategies to encourage learning at home. And the first one is really just something easy that anybody can do, and it's setting up stations in your house. If your child went to Montessori school when they were in preschool, you may know what I mean. But if they didn't, I'll just explain that Montessori is a style of teaching where kids kind of learn on their own through experiences. And in a Montessori classroom, there's different stations set up, like there might be a reading station or a station for math with manipulatives, and maybe a few small workbooks. There's an art station for cutting and for painting, for developing fine motor skills. There can be all kinds of stations depending on, what the teacher is looking to teach. But you can do something similar in your house very easily. For example, you can always leave a puzzle on a table, or you can always leave a box of Legos on a different table. Those are actually really good things for kids to be doing because they help with critical thinking. They actually help with math, and they're fun for kids to do, and they're engaged in something that's not digital. You can also use mental math throughout the day. And I love using mental math, especially in the kitchen. So for example, you might use it when you're thinking about math. One thing I can share is that in teaching the upper grades in elementary, that fractions, decimals, and percents are incredibly important as kids get older. They actually hold the foundation for pre-algebra and algebra. And algebra is the foundation for every other math subject your child will ever see in high school and college. And even the SAT and the ACT, the math sections are all based on algebra. So as much as we can help our kids build that foundation through fractions, decimals, and percents, the better off they're going to be. So allow them to help you if you're making something in the kitchen. Put them in charge of measuring. Ask questions like, this calls for 3/4 of flour. Is that more or less than 1? Always relating to, is this more or less than 1? So kids get the idea that a fraction is less than 1. Allow them to help you make the shopping list. And when you go shopping, ask them about pricing. Oh, that's $1.75. Is that more or less than $2? Or where is that between $1 and $2? Is that more like $2 or more like $1? What is that closest to? Asking them to help you add up the prices of just a couple of things. Asking them to round for you. In restaurants, asking them about the tip. Okay, if 10% is $2.50, what's 20%? It's basically doubled. Can you think what that might be? How much should we leave for a tip? And certainly calculating time, not just in the kitchen, but asking kids, we have to leave for soccer practice in 20 minutes. Is that closer to 15 minutes? Is it closer to a half hour? Can you set 20 minutes on a timer? And the timer that I would recommend for helping kids understand elapsed time is called the time timer, which is a really cool timer with a floating disc that disappears, and kids get a really good sense of elapsed time. You can also incorporate reading. So it could be in the station that I mentioned, where you just basically have a little bin with books and magazines. Could be even baseball cards. That's fine too. That's reading. Or you could have something more formal for kids to practice their skills. And this might be DEAR time, which it stands for drop everything and read. So it might be you have a schedule of twice a week. Everybody in your family gets together and you all read independently, or you read individually. It could be shared reading, especially for your reluctant reader. And because a lot of kids with weak executive function skills often have difficulty with academics, not always, but a lot of times, we want to make sure that they're still reading. And if they're a reluctant reader, it might be you read a page, they read a page, or you read 2 pages and they read 1 page. But if you do read with your child, try not to correct them very much. Don't worry, they drop a word ending, They leave out a word, they say a word that's about the same. None of that matters. Only correct them if it's a major error that affects their comprehension. Otherwise, if we correct kids too much in reading, they're not going to want to do it with us. And we want to place reading time as right around bedtime so it feels relaxing for them. It's a way to unwind. And if you have a child that doesn't really want to read at all, audiobooks are fine. It's perfectly okay for them to listen to a book. Ideally, they're also following along to a hard copy book or in their Kindle. But if they won't do that, listening to a book is okay too. And then lastly, good old-fashioned practice. If you're worried your child's behind, ask your teacher, is there something small my child can be working on? I think these things are great for the summer. There's nothing wrong with good old-fashioned workbooks. I would make sure that they're easy things that kids can do and practice. For example, maybe they need to practice their math facts. I like this type of practice better than getting the type of workbooks that parents often get over the summer, those bridge workbooks. They can be really difficult for kids and cause frustration, and they require a lot of parental help. So instead, get something where they're just practicing their skills, especially if they already know them. These things are ones that rely on repetition. And then as you think about other ways to shore up skills, they can also be working on things online, because not all screens are created equal. And these are some that I found to be helpful for elementary schoolers. I like Academics because it's kind of like video game practice for math, Starfall for younger kids, and then IXL, which is a paid service actually, but this is great, especially in the summer, to keep kids on track. So how do you get these things done? Certainly you can set expectations, meaning if your kids have no homework and you want them to do a little, and then maybe you have a sixth grader with homework, you might say, well, while Jenny's doing her homework, you're also going to have a little bit of homework time. And this is when they can go to the stations that you set up. Maybe you have a coloring book station and an art station. It's great for kids to practice those fine motor skills. That can be homework time. Or if you want them to do something before they go to electronics, you can say, when you finish that workbook page, then you can play Nintendo Switch. So using the when then approach is helpful. I love timers. This is the one I mentioned before, the time timer. I think they're extremely helpful, especially for young kids. And I've used these timers with kids through college. Actually, they're great. So they can be anything, like let's work on this for 10 minutes, make it super easy, set the timer for 10 minutes. And then lastly, if you want to do online practice and you're worried that your child may go off the rails on YouTube or other places they shouldn't be, you can set up website boosters and blockers. And these are all examples of website blockers that allow you to just whitelist the sites you want your kids to go to that are okay, or you can blacklist the sites you don't want them to go to, like YouTube. And then this is one for kids. So this would be for older students that have a phone, not for younger kids, because hopefully they don't have a phone yet. But if you find that your older student is on their phone too much when they're doing work, research shows that a tech break is best, meaning that the phone is not even in the room. It's just not even near them. It's too tempting. However, when we work with kids, we want to teach them skills to monitor their own behaviors. So as executive function coaches, we work a lot on skills like calendaring, taking an assignment and breaking it down into smaller chunks. We work with kids on ways to stay focused on what they have to do, how to do basic things like read directions well and follow through on assignments. But we also work with them on things that can get in their way, especially as they're older, like technology. Hey, when you feel like you're about to go down that rabbit hole of TikTok, what can you do to stay on track? And this is one app that we use. In fact, it's super popular with kids. It's called Forest. It allows kids to set a timer on their phone for how long they do not want to look at their phone. Like, how long do I want to study for the science test without looking at Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. They set the circular timer, as you see here. And then as the timer ticks, a tree starts to grow on their home screen. And this is really motivating to kids because they want their tree to grow to fruition and to be planted in their forest. And then once the tree is planted in their forest, it asks if they want to stay focused some more. I actually like this because the company that runs this app actually plants a tree for every, I think it's every 1,000, a real tree for every 1,000 trees that are planted in the virtual forest. So in addition to allowing screen time to help us, we also want to set boundaries at times. So that means we might have digital free dinners. We're obviously going to encourage offline play, getting outside, moving. We can just say moving your body, get outside and move your body. Anything like that can help with screen time. There was a study I found to be really interesting, just released, looking at 12 and 13-year-olds, and it found that students that spent 20 hours a week on video games, and we think 20 hours a week, oh my God, that's crazy. Who would ever do that? But it's actually easy to do, a couple hours each day and a bunch of time on weekends, and there's 20 hours. Those kids had the same degree of symptoms of ADHD as kids, with ADHD. So they developed symptoms of ADHD from video games. So as much as possible, we want to help our kids navigate that world and set boundaries for them at home. So the next steps as we wrap up, when you think of developing kids' executive function skills, helping them to look ahead, helping them to follow directions and follow through, you can certainly tackle these things at home with some suggestions I've given you, or you can bring in backup to help. And I found outside help myself as a parent to be incredibly wonderful, because it kind of got me off the hook. Even though I do this for a living, I don't always want that relationship with my kids, even though they're in college now. So it could be that you find a teenager down the street who can work on executive function skills with your child, be a homework helper, assist over the summer, or it could be a professional tutor, which is what we do. And it provides kids with one-to-one attention that can be really helpful. And it also gives them accountability. And then it takes the stress off of you if you're worried that your child might be a little bit behind. So I want to wrap up by saying that many of these things are easier said than done. But at the end of the day, glitches will happen. It's just kind of how things are. And we want to always stay positive with our kids, especially when they're really young. So staying positive can be a 30-day challenge. We can even make this 30-day challenge a 7-day challenge or a 14-day challenge. But the idea during a challenge is to find one positive thing about our kids each day. So it might be, I love the way you came home and you hung your coat on the rack. Or I love the way that you started on your homework without me asking. I love the way you put down Xbox when I asked you the first time. That's awesome. Just kind of noticing things that they do. Because at the end of the day, it really is all about relationships with kids. It doesn't really matter what their fourth quarter grade in social studies was in fourth grade, but it does matter how they felt about school, if they felt they were doing a good job, if they were keeping up, and they felt confidence, and they felt like they had a good relationship with their parents. It's really all about relationships. So Diane, I'm going to wrap up, and I would love to go to questions in just a second. So if you have questions, please throw them into the chat. And if I can help you, you can take your phone and hold it up to this QR code, and that will take you to our consultation calendar, where you can talk to one of our program managers, and they can listen to issues that any of your kids are having and help you navigate those things now, or set kids up for success over the summer. All right, so let's go to Q&A. And after we're done, there will be a quick survey that will pop up. And if you could be so kind as to fill that out for me, I would really appreciate it. So I'm going to stop share. And I'm going to go to our chat. So let's start here and see what is on your mind. All right, hold on one second. In our current school, we can't predict how much homework she will bring home. Sometimes she brings home 2 to 3 hours of homework when she gets home from school around 5 p.m. Seeing that the homework amount leads to her own breakdown. Previously, she was in a zero homework school. And I can see why that would be really difficult, feeling unpredictable. And what I would do is talk to the teacher about it and use the words I've noticed, because it feels better to a teacher than saying, hey, you're totally inconsistent with your homework. Instead, I've noticed that Susie is having difficulty predicting about how much homework is going to be given. Is there a rhythm for how you give out homework? Sometimes she has none, sometimes she has a lot. Sometimes teachers don't realize that they're inconsistent with homework, that there may be other teachers in the team that are giving a lot of homework on different nights. So I would start out with the teacher. I would also sit down with your child and ask, are there other things that they could be doing in advance leading up to all this homework? Are there things that might be contributing, like a big project, as I mentioned earlier, that they could be chipping away at in advance? As a teacher, I remember one year, I used to teach at Forestville Elementary in Great Falls, and I taught 6th grade. And one year I had this girl in my class named Haley, and Haley was adorable. I loved her, and I couldn't wait for her mom to come in for her parent conference. You get like all of 20 minutes in November. And so her mom comes in, and I'm really excited to tell her mom like what a great kid Haley is and how much I love having her in the class and all these great things. And she pulls up the kid chair and she sits in the chair and she said, look, if you don't stop it with the homework, I'm going to talk to the principal about moving my daughter out of your class. And I said, what do you mean? Can you please explain what's going on? And she said, Haley has on average about 3 hours of homework every night, and it's overwhelming. I might have to take her out of gymnastics. And I said, oh, I wish you had come to me before about this. It's November, I need to know these things. And I felt awful about the situation. And so I said, let's work this out together and see if we can remedy the situation. It turned out a couple of things that the kids went to multiple classes. And so even if I gave a half hour, other teachers were also giving on different nights a decent amount of homework. So it all piled up. But also, even though Haley always came to school with her homework perfectly done, because her mother was helping her and I had no idea, I just thought she was doing this on her own. I didn't realize that she was exhibiting some symptoms of attention issues. And I saw it a little bit in class, but it was really profound at home. And so her mom then went and talked to her pediatrician, which was helpful. And then on my end, I worked with the other teachers to make sure we were giving, adequate, correct amounts of homework. So I always recommend, based on my own personal experience, to talk to the teacher. So what might a parent do if the child reacts badly to discussing homework in any way, even along the helpful lines that you described? Believing that any mention to be a topic of criticism or controlling and wanting to manage it totally on their own. Is this an executive function issue? And the answer is no. It could just be that your child is independent. They want to do it on their own, and they have a hard time accepting criticism or feedback even. So it's pretty normal. If your child is able to do it on their own 80% of the time, I wouldn't worry about the other 20%, and I would let them turn it in the way it is. Teachers need to know what kids can do on their own. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's okay. So I would allow them to handle it on their own and say, you know what, you're right. I trust that you can do this on your own and that you're going to do a good job. I'll know when we look at your portal together and see how you're doing. For example, if there's a lot of missing assignments, I'll know that we need to get help, and either I can help you or I can bring in somebody else to help. But the grades in the portal can be the litmus test. I'm not as concerned about the grades as I am about missing work. So if you find that your child is generally able to do things on their own with maybe a missing assignment here or there, I'd leave it alone. But if you see a lot of things that are going awry, that's when I would intervene again. And I might set up a regular time to check in with your child, maybe once a week, look at the portal together, look at Schoology together, maybe every couple of weeks. But I would use the trust but verify approach if you have a very independent child. All right, so let me look at our next question. Hold on one second. Time management, not necessarily related to homework, but in general, getting ready in the morning, she always comes down late, taking her bath at night in 15 minutes. Instead of 15 minutes, she takes 30 to 40 minutes. No sense of time. I have a timer. She can also use her Alexa. She keeps adding time to it after setting the alarm. Oh, wow. This child, you're right, Rula. This child probably does have some really weak executive function skills. And I would ask, does this really impact her? So if the bath thing is not a big deal, I would set the timer for maybe an in-between amount of time. So if you want it to be 15 minutes and she wants to be in there for 40 minutes, maybe come to an agreement. I would have a discussion with her. Let's come up with a time that feels like it's in between. Would 20 minutes work for you? And then one thing we do with kids all the time is to talk about obstacles they're going to encounter. What might you do when it's time to get out of the bath and Alexa tells you it's time, but you want to press the snooze button, or you want to stay in the bath? What might you do to get yourself out of the bath? What's a strategy that you could use? So we always talk about to kids in terms of strategies. What's one way you could get around this feeling of, wanting to come down late from school or stay in the bath too long? But in the morning, I would ask, how do you want to wake up? What's the best way for you to wake up? And allow her to be part of the discussion. I would love to hear how to help with shifting. Once I get my kids to start, for example, piano practice, my kids will just playing past the timer and I have a hard time without nagging for them to go to the next checklist item. With 3 kids, better to have, okay, so let me ask that question first. Answer that. So shifting means stopping one thing and starting another. So shifting can mean, what usually happens is stopping video games and starting something else that they have to do. So you might ask, what's a way you can stop practicing piano, and kind of give rewards for that. So what does ending well mean? So usually with video games, if the timer goes off, ending well means that they put down the video game at that time, not when they get to the next level, and they start the new thing. So if they're able to end well, they get the video game again later. Or if they're able to end well, maybe they get a reward like a half hour later bedtime or something like that. So I'd first have a discussion of, how do you want to end? How will you know it's time to end? Do you need a warning? And then perhaps build in like an ending well. If you end when the timer goes off, that's excellent. And, think about a reward that can go. Maybe it's just that you don't nag them, but maybe it's just that the confidence they get and knowing that they can end on their own. With 3 kids, is it better to have 3 separate calendars or one family calendar? If you have good executive function skills and you can manage 3 calendars, you can certainly do that. That personally would be hard for me. So it kind of all depends on your abilities to manage. If you find that stressful, I would be inclined to put everything on one calendar. So I hope this is helpful to everyone. Those are all the questions that I have. And I hope this gives you some good ideas to help with your student as the year goes on, some executive function skills that you can incorporate and help your children to plan ahead. If I can help with anything in the future, please feel free to reach out to me. Diane, thank you so much for inviting me this evening. It was a pleasure to see you and speak to all the parents at Colvin Run.